You know, the state of Georgia adopted a new slate of election laws. The reverberations ran across the country. They're still being sorted out. Well, in Lansing, some of the very same ideas are being considered right now for Michigan elections. I want to talk about that this morning with two state senators. Democrat Marshall Bullock is here, and so is Republican and the former Secretary of State Ruth Johnson, who knows a thing or two about elections. We'll get to election law really quickly, but right off the top, if I could, I'd like you both to weigh in quickly on the news that came this past week via Charlie LaDuff at Deadline Detroit that Governor Whitmer made her pandemic trip to Florida to see her father on a jet that is owned by three businesses who contribute quite a bit politically. Is this a problem, or is it much ado about nothing? Senator Johnson, let me start with you.
Well, first of all, I think that when you're the governor, you have to be a good role model. And if you make rules for the rest of us to follow, then you need to follow them too. And I think that was the first disappointment. We have to inspire people. It's not really helpful just to make laws or rules or for the governor to state certain things that she doesn't follow herself. And yes, it's a big problem when you push businesses that have a jet to give you a ride that's worth tens of thousands of dollars without really disclosing it. And actually, she said that she didn't go. And I really do think that as elected officials, our job is to inspire, and we have to do that with transparency and honesty. And when that doesn't exist, our state just divides.
And of course, she talked a lot about transparency in her campaign days. Senator Bullock, your thoughts?
Actually, I'm more of a, it was a personal matter, you know, to see her elderly father. I know the stories come out that she took a private jet. I don't know how you move around the country without somebody knowing, you know, everything. When she took a trip to go see what is now President Biden before he was vice president, they're following you everywhere. So it's a personal matter to go see her father. So I kind of think it's a much to do about nothing, actually.
Well, when political leaders accept benefits or contributions or things of value, it needs to be reported or disclosed, doesn't it?
Yeah. I agree with the transparency portion, and
okay.
I can't speak for the governor on the disclosure of that, but yes, you do.
Let's move to what the debate that's going on right now in Lansing. Senator Johnson, I think there are a lot of people who are worried that this continued fight over that we need to firm up and change our election law continues to feed the narrative that there's been something so wrong with the last election when we found that examples of fraud in 2020 were actually fewer than we found in 2016. Doesn't this continually feed a false narrative?
Well, we did have several really big changes, and one was in November of 2018, we did pass a Proposal 3, that changed how we did elections substantially. And also, the Secretary of State made many different changes without going through the legislative process. With COVID, we had a lot of changes. And we did have a lot of times best practices weren't used. There were two people that were charged with hurting people as far as disenfranchising voters on a large scale. And we also know that the absentee ballot application was done without approval by the legislature, and that's contrary to Michigan law. And also the Secretary of State changed the policies that the clerks have to follow to eliminate verifying residency of a voter, and she sent out over 800,000 pre-filled out absentee ballot requests to people that are not qualified to vote in Michigan, often in another state. Some were dead, a few non-citizens and underage. That was a job done by local clerks for decades and decades, and she took that over and used a list that's largely flawed and sent out over 800,000 pre-filled out forms to people to vote in Michigan. It was absentee ballot requests forms.
Senator Bullock, at the very base of it, part of what she's talking about here is that we clearly have a big clerical task ahead of us just to clean up these voter rolls. There's nothing wrong with doing that, is there?
There's nothing wrong with cleaning up the voters' task rolls, but at the end of the day, we voted to expand voting rights. We made it like no excuse, absentee ballots. And this theory of dead folks are voting or folks are voting. If a ballot goes out to someone erroneously, it doesn't come back. It's not like the person in the house fills out 9 ballots from their same house after someone's dead. Senator Johnson was the Secretary of State. And in 2016 and 18, she touted that the clerks are rated some of the best here in the country and that our process was ensured with integrity and security. And these things and all of the ballot and tabulators things were great. And we are one of the ranked in the country. And for us to believe that it went to autumn be damn hell in 2 years is really like mind blowing for me.
Senator Johnson, what do you do with that fact that voters in Michigan sort of spoke and basically said they want voting to be easier? They want more people to be able to cast these absentee ballots, and that seems at odds to many of those same voters to see that Republicans, in their eyes, are trying to make it harder to vote in Michigan.
Well, actually, I was, when I ran for Secretary of State, I ran on no reason absentee or mail-in ballots for everyone with nuts and bolts that protected the integrity of it. We have had huge changes. Prop 3 says we don't need to see a warm body anymore. Same-day registration, which we can't compare with other places. We have a Secretary of State that said even if they're flagged in the qualified voter file as voting in another state, don't ask them any more questions like we used to. Don't identify where they get to vote. They can vote in several states, and we don't have a system to catch that. And all these things are new changes, and I think it's really important not to ignore them, to make people feel secure in knowing that their vote will count. They will not be disenfranchised, or their voice will be heard, and we do that by making it easier to vote, but harder to cheat. And the legislation we're coming up with.
I find that interesting. I find that we're making it easier to vote while we put in all of these restrictions and then harder to cheat, but yet we've not proven that anyone has cheated, and that baffles me.
I would say that we have proof of a number of things. There's 2 people that have been charged with just out-and-out violation of the law, with robocalls telling people they could go vote the next day. Don't come because of COVID, don't come because of the lines. We also know that we really didn't have a system put in place for so many absentees that would make sure and ensure that for the public that it was done in a good way. We know that there's cracks in the dam. We have lots of information that we know with all these changes that have been made recently, and with some of the changes the current Secretary of State made without going through the legislative process, that there's problems. And all we have to do is make sure that we can fix them, we can clean them up, that we can make sure that it is easier to vote and harder to cheat. And one of the biggest misnomers is that the Republicans somehow are doing something wrong. Everyone knows the governor, who is a Democrat, has to sign these bills, has to be bipartisan.
I got to get to a break, but Senator Bullock, there's a lot of discussion then about whether it's a bridge too far to require an ID of a voter. Is that asking too much to make sure that the person who's voting is who they say they are?
In general, you want some identification, but all kinds of things happen. We have undocumented citizens here in the city in the state of Michigan. Folks lose an ID. Folks misplace an ID, but they still want to be obligated to vote. That's their right. And so to hold a series of barriers to restrict them from voting is also like amoral.
I got to get to a break, but I'm delighted to have the 2 of you here. I know you both enjoy sparring and being together with each other. So thanks so much for being the 2 that we've talked to today. Stay safe, and happy Mother's Day as well, Ruth.
Thank you so much. Appreciate being on, Kevin.
You bet.
And it's always good to see you, Senator.
I'll hug you when I see you on Tuesday.
There we go. Peace in our time. Quick break. Back with more in just a minute.